We're almost there. We're almost there. I will now speak for 3 hours.
What if we don't want to be almost there? I mean, I could do this for a while.
You're still almost there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So listen, my name is Jeff Kripal, and this is Mike Cifone and Paul Smith. And the idea of this event, we don't have a fire, or do we have a fire?
We have a fire right there.
We have a fire.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wish it was like actually.
Okay. This is a fireside chat, and we're going to have a conversation. I'll formally introduce both Mike and Paul, and you can get a sense for their backgrounds, and then we can just open it up. Okay? Okay? All right. All right, so Mike Cifone. Mike is right there. Received his PhD in the history of philosophy of science from the University of Maryland in 2009. Dr. Cifone is the founder and current executive director, CEO of the Society for UAP Studies, and the founding editor-in-chief of Limina, the Journal of UAP Studies. Established in early 2022, both the Society and the Journal serve as core infrastructure for the growing academic field of UAP studies. SUAPS, or SUAPS, provides opportunities for peer-reviewed publication, regular academic convenings, interdisciplinary debate, international cooperation, and the strategic development of UAP studies as a legitimate scholarly discipline. Mike's current work focuses on the philosophical and conceptual challenges of constructing a science of UAP. In February 2025, he was awarded a research fellowship at the Center for Alternative Rationalities in Erlangen, Germany, where he will begin in October 2025 on a book project advancing foundational ideas in UAP studies. So that's Mike.
It's actually about Valet, but I didn't say that.
Yeah, no, it's not Jacques Vallée. That's
Down
Mike.
in the valley.
The book's about Jacques?
It will be, yeah.
Okay.
Oh. Does Jacques know that?
No, he does not. He doesn't. I've never met him, really.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Oh.
Oh,
Not yet.
you'd love him.
Okay.
And you'd say nicer things about him. You know?
Let me introduce you first, Paul.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, don't start
I'm a little
talking.
bit cautious,
Stop
you know what I
it,
mean?
stop it.
In the Fireside Chat.
For 7 years, Paul Smith, PhD, was a member of the military's Stargate remote viewing program as a remote viewer, training instructor, unit security officer, and unit historian. Former president of the nonprofit International Remote Viewing Association, he heads remote viewing instructional services at ourreviewer.com.
Ourviewer.com.
Yeah. His book, Reading the Enemy's Mind, was a Reader's Digest book bonus feature and Editor's Choice selection. When did that come out? I read that. That's years ago.
2005.
What?
2005.
Yeah, it was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
He is also the author of The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. Paul has a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. Where's that?
You know, it's on the other side of the universe from Houston.
All right. It's in philosophy of mind, consciousness, philosophy of science, and philosophy of parapsychology. His BA is from BYU and MS from the National Defense University, both in Middle Eastern Studies. Paul is a board member of the Rhine Research Center, past president of the International Remote Viewing Association, and former board member of the Parapsychological Association. So welcome, Mike and Paul.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm going to try to moderate this, which means I'm going to try to control these guys, which is a problem probably. I'm going to try. So let's keep it conversational and talk about our different perspectives or our orientations towards the UFO or the UAP and what you think this is all about, essentially. I know that's an unfair question, but I think that's kind of where we are today, is what is it all about, and how do we, to go back to Hussein's talk, how do we approach it?
And that's enough, Jeff.
Okay, I'll shut up.
I
I told you it's hard to do. This is a really hard job.
I'd like to kick this off if I could.
Okay.
Because I have a very first question for Mike, and I think that he'll appreciate this. I hope he's got an answer for it. No? So are you yourself an experiencer? And if not, or even if so, what was it that drew you to this subject matter? I've been dying to ask that.
That's a long story.
So I think
Never mind, let's ask a different question then.
Sorry. Yes, there is an origin story for me, why I jumped into here, and that person is sitting in this room somewhere, I hope. Yes, you're
Oh,
here.
Kevin.
Kevin's your origin story?
He is.
All right, all right.
It involves COVID as well.
Okay.
And some weird synchronicities. But I saw some crazy stuff in the sky, but I never, and there were stories in my family about, my aunts one day, 4 o'clock in the morning, heading down to Atlantic City in 1973 or something in a huge boat, leaded gasoline, headed down to, and there was something that just came out of nowhere and scared the hell out of them, and swerving and screaming for their lives. So there was these stories. My dad saw something which probably was a meteor, but there were these stories about it, and Whitley's book was in the house. That scared the hell out of me when I read it in 1990.
Cover alone was,
yeah. It's kind of horrific, but I was not particularly interested. I mean, yes, I like science fiction and all of these things that a lot of us like. But I was a very religious kid, and I then had a turn of heart to science, and I got interested in relativity and physics and so on and so forth, and I eventually pursued a PhD in that, in the foundations of physics. I'm not a physicist, so to be clear. In the history and philosophy of science. But I wasn't particularly interested in it. I heard stories about, in the early 2000s about these people that were studying UFOs and how they do it and being given money to do that. And it turns out, I think I was being told stories about the Institute for Advanced Studies in Austin, I think it was, with Eric Davis and the crowd there. And then I eventually met Michael Ibison and started a long correspondence with Michael on very fundamental questions in theoretical physics, somewhat related to the UFO question. How the hell are they doing it? But that's not my origin story, really. I mean, so I'm not an experiencer. Just one day I was sick with probably an infection secondary to COVID that caused me to have pericarditis. So I'm sick in the hospital for weeks, months, and I'm kind of high on prednisone, and I'm on my iPad or something, and then I come across an interview with Kevin and Kurt Jaimungal, I think, on the Theories of Everything podcast. And I recognized Kevin immediately as someone into foundations of physics, as a theoretical physicist, and also somebody from NASA, formerly NASA Ames. And I was like, what? What is he talking about? What is this stuff? Is this real? So, and then he mentioned the 2019 paper, and like all academics, right, I would go and get the paper, download it, and read all the references and read the paper, and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me, is this, so it just captured me, and I emailed absolutely everybody I know, or could possibly know, who's into this. So I emailed, SCU and Mark Rodiger at QFOS and everybody I could, and that's how I got into it. So that's kind of my origin story.
Okay, good. I probably ought to tell folks mine as well.
Yeah.
Depending on how you define experiencer, I could be an experiencer or maybe not. And for a long time, I've been, many of you know, most of you probably, you heard the introduction, I'm a remote viewer and a remote viewing instructor from the Stargate days. And for a long time, ever since remote viewing came into the public in late '96, I've been trying to hold the UFO topic and separate from remote viewing, and mostly failed at it because I have so many colleagues that are immersed in all this stuff. But now that we've got some really good, hardcore evidence from the Navy and other sources like that, and then I'm trying to carve out a niche for remote viewing aliens, humans, and consciousness. I think that's a place where I can get into. But my experiencer part goes back to the 1980s, starting in about 1984, when over that roughly decade and some into 1990, I was tasked on a number of UFO events, ET kinds of related things. The Dark Side of the Moon by I helped Ingo Swann. Some of you may know he's the person that created and discovered. It's sort of a joint process, remote viewing. So I have experienced aliens and UFO kinds of things from my armchair, right, so to speak. But I've had some pretty vivid experiences, which I won't go into now because it would take too much of our time. And so that's really my core. That and the fact that the company I keep has kind of forced me to keep my feet in that fire, so to speak. Hal Putoff and I go back a long way to '84 is when I first met him. And along the way, Eric and I have gotten to be buddies, and Jacques Vallée and John Alexander and folks like that. So that's my UAP pedigree. I mean, it's not nearly as rich as some of you guys, but it at least has kept me in the game for 3 decades, 4 decades, however many works out. So
can I ask both of you? I mean, you describe yourself as a very religious kid, but you didn't tell us what religion.
Catholic.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
No.
don't worry, there's Catholics
I'm
here.
supposed to wait.
Diana just raised her hand, right?
Oh no,
Yeah.
I want to know. I want to know. I'm the historian of religion. I really want to know about that religious background, and I want to know about your Mormonism. I'm thinking of Matt's talk. I don't know where Matt is. Matt, I'm thinking of Mormonism here and Catholicism. So what's going on there?
I thought I would end up in a monastery, to be quite honestly.
Yeah,
and,
so did I, by the way.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That he would end up in a monastery?
Well, that's a different story. No, I thought I would end up in a monastery.
I was headed in that direction.
Yeah.
But it was I don't know, I had a very profound connection. I mean, I've never talked about this. It's very personal, I guess. But I had a very profound connection. You know, I had this entity, I guess, experience in some ways in my life. And, you know, this is very personal, strangely.
No, it's okay. We
Never
are
talked about
personal.
this.
I'm getting
But
personal.
yeah, this is very personal.
Yeah.
I've never really reflected on that. But I had a very personal relationship, you know, with a presence or something, I guess, is how you could describe it now on reflection. But I was extremely religious. I mean, I was going to Latin Mass, studying church Latin.
Wow.
I love ancient music, so I was listening to Gregorian chant and, you know, all of this kind of thing. You can imagine. And then death happened, and my grandmother, with whom I developed a very profound relationship, died suddenly when I was 10 days before my birthday. Mm-hmm. When I was 10, cancer, 54 years old, and I watched her sort of suffer and die. So that cracked, ontological shock, right? I mean, this is Tillich, right? The opening forth of the nihil or whatever, the nothing, right? So I had a very profound experience with that, and I violently rejected religion. And then I switched to science. I was in an extremely depressed state. My dad, you know, tried to help me escape that. Classical music saved me. I remember the first album that I listened to. So then I got embedded even more in classical music, and then I was exploring science. My dad was really the inspiration for physics, and we would always talk about Einstein, relativity theory, and this kind of a thing. And he's a great. His imaginarium is very profoundly active. So we were always imagining the stars and space travel and the theories of relativity and the relativity of time and space and, you know, these kinds of things. And this then captured my heart. And then I followed through with that. And then I got interested in philosophy. I struggled to read Kant right from my dad's book. And I just gravitated towards both music and philosophy. And then when I met my mentors in school, they opened me up to this whole world of the intellectual richness of the philosophical tradition, but also in conversation at a deep level with physics, which I had feared. I hated math, I hated all of that. And then I started to discover in college that actually if you study this stuff, you can actually master it to some extent. So I got to a point, right? And I was able to go to graduate school. They liked the paper I wrote on special relativity and the block world universe thing. And then I ended up studying at university under the student of David Bohm's. Oh. My teacher is one of Bohm's students. One of the...
Was it Boob?
Yeah.
I had the same guy. Yeah. He was great.
There you go.
Yeah.
We're done now.
Wow. And and then I got to interact with the even higher level of thinker in theoretical physics. So I became very conversant and comfortable in physics and philosophy and music and the humanities in general. But then I had a second crisis in graduate school, and then I started reading what you would call, I guess, the history of human consciousness, Morris Berman. Anybody knows Morris Berman's work? Yes. Yeah?
One person.
The lone soul.
Somebody
read
just
Morris
slap for the
Berman.
heck of
You
it. It's
should
like,
all read.
I
But
don't know,
anyway,
I'll
so I
get
had
it.
a crisis, a spiritual break in Oxford University in a dank June afternoon when it was pouring rain, and I did not want to be sort of contained within the silos that I'm trying to create for UAP studies. But strangely enough, I'm returning back to the thing I rejected, the return of the repressed, right, for anybody. So I expanded my knowledge of philosophy, reading Hegel and Heidegger, and deepening my understanding of Kant and the responses to Kant, and how that was related to the history of science, and more broadly the evolution or history of human consciousness.
And you write a lot about Spinoza too. So
Yeah, I have more recently become much more interested in Spinoza as a very radical Enlightenment thinker that is very underappreciated in the conversation. Yes.
another lone voice in the wilderness. Okay.
Yes. Who is this?
One person.
But anyway, there's a lot to, I have a lot to say about that. But anyway,
Yeah.
I don't want to vacuum
Okay.
the air, so.
Well, I guess we're on the religion thing still. So,
But does that answer your question? Yes,
Yeah,
all
it
right.
does actually.
and,
Thank you
and
for
this
that.
is somewhat for Matt's benefit to start with.
There's one person again clapping.
You know, is that
I like
a
a
paid,
singular.
shill that you
Yeah.
have out there? Okay, all right. Yeah.
I got to Venmo you
So,
right now. Sorry.
I get a real kick when I'm on being interviewed on Coast to Coast or some of these other late night paranormal radio shows. I always enjoy telling the audience, somewhat shockingly to their perspective, that I belong to the only Christian denomination that believes as a point of doctrine in intelligent life on other planets. Okay, and then I say, well, but we don't necessarily believe there are little green men, or anything like that. But I have to, add that caveat so I'll be able to stay in the church. But it really is the case. And in fact, I've found, I was going to make this comment to Matt, but the opportunity didn't present itself. I've found that I feel like that Mormon doctrine and theology, such as it is, really gives me permission to explore these things. It's really quite open to it. I did have two instances where members of the church gave me a hard time, and I was telling some really good friends here before about this, but the first one was I was on an interview show in St. George, Utah. There was a phone-in, so I was still in Austin at the time. And some guy comes on and says, "You're doing the work of the devil." And I want to say that with nothing derogatorily meant towards Baptists, but you all know what I mean. That sounded more like something a Baptist would say rather than a Mormon, right? But the really telling one, I guess it was telling, I don't know, when the remote viewing program was finally revealed to the world at the end of '96, I kind of felt like I had to talk to my Mormon bishop about it so he wouldn't be shocked or outraged if he started hearing me about me in the media, which was it quickly happened, right? So I went into him and I said, look, I need to tell you something. And I told him about my participation in the remote viewing program, and he sits there, and you have to understand this guy, he was a cryptographer for the National Security Agency. This was in Maryland, right near Fort Meade. He goes, psychic, I don't know. But if the government's doing it, it's great. So I've never actually had any kind of, certainly not an ontological shock, which has become an interesting topic of mine, thanks to the first one of these conferences.
Okay.
And I've never really had an ontological shock with this stuff. It's just like, okay, that makes perfect sense. And it even goes to the UFO UAP question as well. And so I don't know how much more, I don't really have much more of an intellectual journey in that respect. With regard to the subject matter, it just seems like a natural fit. So.
Great. Well, there's.
And I paid every one of them. Yeah.
So can you tell us where you're at now? I mean, where are we at? Like, maybe Mike. I mean, you edit this journal and you lead this intellectual movement. I mean, you started out with Einstein and physics and the block universe. Like, where are you now?
I don't know where I am now, Jeff. I don't know.
No, seriously, it's like
Well,
a
I
real
mean,
question.
I'm a lot of people I feel in this space are sort of downstream from where I want to be. I don't know about a lot of the conclusions or interpretive closures that I see sort of, and we're all sort of experimenting and trying, and I very much deeply appreciate that. But where I think we are now is post-2021 with the emergence of these new scientific research groups that are forming around the question of the facticity of these phenomena insofar as they're measurable. I think we've crossed, if not a Rubicon, certainly as a kind of a boundary, right? That's why I named the journal Limina, because we are sort of inhabiting that and we are attempting to exit that boundary and to stabilize something. And that's what science is. It is a process, I think, of the emergence of a stable perceptual structure that we can relate to the apparatuses of observation and measurement, right? And now we're talking about the human as one of those instruments. But I think at this point now what is needed and where we are is the necessity for the reflection on the foundations of the attempts to study the phenomenon, namely ufology. And I think that, and we have projects at the Society and at the Journal, special issues that we're planning on trying to think about, so what are the conceptual foundations for the way in which ufology has been practiced? So this partly is a descriptive thing. And then there's this normative. So what ought the foundations be? And what other research communities and other practices are relevant to establishing the standards of evidence with respect to the field work and investigations of the phenomenon. And so I like to call that the classical ufology tradition, right? As opposed, and that largely I think is proceeded within a largely unreflective, use of forensics in some sense, like criminology. And so I like to call ufology is more or less like kind of like a forensic cold case chase, right?
Yeah, it's a crime scene.
Adam Frank seemed to like this one.
Yeah.
But there's this transition, right, that's going on that we're still sort of in the process of seeing emerge, and we're all sort of, I think, inhabiting this kind of a liminal transitional state. From that kind of a process, that kind of a study of the phenomenon, or engagement with the phenomenon, to the attempt to kind of move it within the realm of science, of the stricter sciences, which are not primarily driven by a forensic case investigation to try to, solve the question of who done it, or what was it that did it, But we're moving into this realm where we're forward looking. We're calibrating instruments. We're setting them up. We're having them look for the phenomena, and we're trying to establish the sense in which the phenomena may be anomalous and with respect to what, And I'm interested in bringing into the discussion the question of the first-person experience as well. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I want to distinguish the problem of the UAP as a problem for the physical sciences from the experiential component, which I think is a much harder question to engage. I don't think obviously it's not impossible, and the stuff that's been being done at GEMI is excellent, and I want to engage that more deeply. But I want to sort of distinguish these questions, the UAP as a physical object, the subjective encounters with these objects, which may or may not have anomalous characteristics, and then this other question, of entity encounters and so on and so forth. I see there's three things that I want to distinguish. And so I'm way upstream, like I'm looking for the origin of not UAP, but the origin of the foundations of a possible science of these phenomena. So I want to talk about the conceptual foundations, looking backwards towards ufology and then forwards to a possible new science and what kinds of frameworks may be necessary And I'm not entirely convinced that we have to exit what we understand about physics and so on. I'm not entirely convinced that's the case. It may be unconventional applications of conventional physics, is, I think, the warp drive interpretation of some of the physical records.
That's very much a Hal
indicates
Puthoff position too, yeah.
So because we've never done the homework, right, problem, which is, well, how can I use general relativity for the purposes of travel? I mean, we use Newton, or quantum theory. Like, what does it mean, to talk about travel in quantum theoretic terms? So that's an engineering question as well.
So
right?
You let me jump in. So I like this metaphor of being up and downstream that you're using, but I think that we might expand it a little bit, because in one respect, you are upstream from it and looking more for sourcing and that kind of thing. But in respect to where I'm at with this, you are quite a ways downstream. You know a lot more about the whatever people are theorizing. You know a lot more about who's involved doing what to whom and all that kind of thing than me. I'm fairly new. I'm not new to UAP. I'm new to the community. And I've, of course, been much more operationally engaged with this. And I can't tell you who this is for, but in 2011, I was hired to with my small group of remote viewers, to conduct an operational program project. And, of course, as blind, the viewing folks need to be blind to a target. You're not allowed to know what it is you're remote viewing, because that can distort and mess up your results. So when I was done with it, and fortunately it didn't turn out as well as I would have liked, Hal was the tech advisor on this thing, and he revealed to me that it was the Tic Tac incident. So this is in 2011, long before it got all the notoriety it has. And that was way cool, I have to say. If I can use that technical term, you all right with that? It was way cool, right? It was way cool. But that's kind of the level I've always been engaged with this, is I'm just now getting into this. So I really appreciated being able to read your blogs,
thank you.
and read your blogs, and read your blogs. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Because you have provided a large trove of information and speculation, and not really speculation. You tend to want to avoid speculation, right? But I mean, it doesn't matter. You're still going to do some speculation in this field. There's no way around it. And I found that quite interesting. I learned a lot from that process. But see, I think you're way downstream from me in that respect. At the same time, we're almost like we're different streams, right? But I'm trying to play catch up on this, and I'm having some success with that. I'm not sure. So Jeff has already asked about 5 of the questions I had all at once. And so maybe you have something you want to add here.
No, I want to know where you're at. Where are you at now?
Well, first off, I mentioned part of this, right? That I was keeping it at arm's length, and I was what I call a forward-leaning agnostic, right? Where I accept.
You're a coward?
Or do you mean Noel Coward? No, yeah. No, what it was is I was kind of dismayed by the sensationalism in the field. That really bugged the heck out of me. I tend to prefer to go for the truth if I can find it. If I can't find it, get as close as I can. And I'm looking at even today, I'll tell folks, 90% of what you hear about UFOs and UAPs out there is balderdash. The 10% that isn't is what the real core value. That's where the value is, right? And so, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not as far along as you are, is because I didn't want to be engaged in something I wasn't quite sure where the there was, right? So, and then with this latest revolution, it actually started with the 2011 project, because I'm thinking, holy cow, is this kind of data they actually have and are not telling people about, I hang out with John Alexander, and he's skeptical that there's any withholding of information of any significant note, but then I hang out with Hal, who keeps leaking these little tidbits that has over the last 30 years that says there are some things that they're hiding back there, and so I've sort of just been skipping along the surface, I think you say, but now I'm doing a much deeper dive, but I'm really focused and interested in the consciousness thing, the piece of it, that aliens and I'm now convinced there are aliens, even though I had a start on that because some of my remote viewing projects I did in the 80s definitely tied me into something that could only be explained as aliens, right? And alien tech and all of that kind of thing. But again, I was being cautious with that because in remote viewing, you have false positives, okay? There's a certain percentage of the time, you don't know which percentage of it is, that you get it wrong. It just goes with the territory, which is why you need to have objective analysts and it helps if you have additional, parallel information sources that can help validate the results you're getting in a remote viewing project. So I had those experiences, and so I had that's why I was leaning forward as an agnostic here, is because, first of all, I accepted there was intelligent life on other planets, right? That was not a hurdle for me, but what people were saying about them, that's where the hurdles were. And I found out that I could leave my agnosticism behind and then start digging into this, particularly at the level I was interested in, which again, because of the remote viewing, innately and naturally, and in my PhD involved a lot of consciousness studies, that was a logical fit for me, and I certainly can't compete with other people, in the field at the knowledge base, and I'll never be able to catch up. So, I don't know, does that tell you where I'm at?
Not really.
Okay, then elaborate on your question, and I'll try and hit it.
One of the things I want to tease apart here, just because we've had this conversation this afternoon with a number of speakers, I think Peter raised it yesterday. Like, what is the distinction between religious entities and UAP entities?
Okay.
I guess that's really where I want to go.
Okay. Well, let me go there.
Okay, go there.
All right. So this is also something I've shared with a few of you. Years ago at Fort Meade in the remote viewing program, they had a whole bunch of these old Fate magazines and stuff. It was a natural fit, even though we didn't use them as any kind of doctrinal statements or whatever. But the concept was there's a lot of cultural overlay, there's a lot of speculative overlay, and yet there's a core of truth off in which that builds. So we had all these magazines around. I found a Fate magazine. I'm reading through it, and this guy starts talking about Mormonism, Joseph Smith's first vision, which is a paradigmatic in the Mormon belief. And this guy says, well, obviously Joseph Smith was just visited by some aliens, and Moroni was an alien, and who he interpreted as Joseph, as God and Jesus were alien, extraterrestrials was the term he used, extraterrestrials. And I'm thinking, wow, that's kind of a scary thought if you want to be a believing Mormon. And then it dawned on me, by definition, Jesus and God are extraterrestrials, right? And technically in Mormon theology, we all are as well, right? We are all extraterrestrials because we didn't originate here. We originated elsewhere in what we call a pre-existence, and then we end up being receiving physical bodies here, and then we go on from here, right? So that was kind of an interesting enlightenment for me to get. And even to this day, I almost don't know if there's a difference.
Okay,
right?
that's a good point of difference then, because Mike is drawing at least a theoretical difference between the two, and you are leaving that question open.
Yeah.
I guess that's just where I want the conversation to sit for a moment. Okay. We're not going to resolve that here, but I think it's good.
Short of somebody appearing here suddenly and telling us, right? No. No, that's not going to happen.
I mean, this came up too. Just to kind of add my own voice to this. This came up in Kim's talk on ethics, and most of the religious revelations I'm aware of in the past, none of them had any human agency. Human agency is a modern trope. And I just don't get it, frankly. If you look at the religious experience of the past, it's not, people didn't choose this. You don't choose to be Jeremiah or Isaiah why would you choose that? So it's something that is revealed to you. It's something that imposes itself on the human being. It's not something the human being chooses in any agential, ethical way. And I think this is what Kim was trying to get at, is that there is something else going on there.
But surely, one can have the experience of an adventitious imposition without the postulation of an entity external to myself.
Yeah, well, we'll could go there. I mean, what,
I mean, that's why I don't. I mean, look, if an entity appears to me, then it appears to me, right? But
sometimes it does.
yeah, I mean, what can you say? And then it becomes an object of investigation, and hopefully it enters the realm of intersubjective experience, and then that is amenable to some kind of a.
So
Right.
let me stop you there. So this came up earlier in one of the talks too. What if the entity has its own agency? What if we're not in control?
How do I have access to the knowledge of its own agency?
I don't know. How do you?
Because I mean, I assume that you're an agent because you have a kind of continuity and a kind of permanence that is shared by a whole group of individuals with whom I also have a similar level of engagement. And
I don't feel that way, by the
It's
way.
a supposition, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think it's a supposition that we make about about consciousness and subjectivity. I just don't know if it borne out.
I mean, that's just an extension of the other minds problem, where you assume other people have a mind, partly because they behave as if they do. You reflect your own particular inner experience, and you project it on them. And for all we know, and for all I know, none of you guys have a mind here. Oh, no, I don't really believe that. Trust me. But I mean, isn't that kind of the same issue we have? It's a matter of it's an epistemic matter.
I don't want to hog the conversation, but I think
this
there's
is
this
good.
distinction between forms of mind and forms of consciousness. You know, part of us could have agency and part of us couldn't, and I don't see why that's not on the table too. Because that's certainly what the data suggests. I mean, that's what the history of human experience suggests, is that some forms of human experience do have agency, some forms don't. But go back to this question. Of, so you're drawing a distinction between UAP and religious entity. You don't want to suggest that they're the same, and Paul seems to suggest that they might be the same. That's really where the conversation is this
In
afternoon.
a certain definitional context, they might be the same. And it might indeed turn out to be the same. Again, we're lacking in knowledge, right? So, go ahead.
I mean, I don't know what to say about that. I mean, I guess it depends on the, it depends on the case that we're talking about, I guess.
I mean, I get asked that all the time.
Like
on
the
podcasts.
Tic Tac
That's what
doesn't
people-
seem to be, there seems to be a kind of agency involved in its activities, but the thing itself doesn't seem to be an agent. So, I mean, right? So the agency is determining a technological artifact, and then we try to infer something about the agency maybe through the technological artifact. And I think I took that to be partly of what Peter's perspective was, to go through the body to the ontology.
So
And so you're working through the material to the mind.
part of the problem here is how we identify agency in the first place. So I have this thought problem I often present when we try and talk about where does the remote viewing signal come from, right?
Yeah.
And
Where
there's-
does it come from, by the
there's
way?
plenty of, over there. No, there a lot of people have espoused this principle, in that the brain may be a receiver rather than a creator
Yeah.
of all of these experiences. And I refer back to Ingo Swann. He called the brain a transducer of a non-local signal into a local signal that we can objectify and we can express to other people, and that kind of a thing, right? So the thought experiment I say you've got a Martian rover, one of our, from NASA or something, is on the surface of the planet. Then it's driving around and it comes on a Martian. Obviously, we're jumping to some conclusions here, right? But it's driving around and it comes upon a Martian. We'll forget the lag time and signals. And the Martian sees this thing, and maybe they're pre-technical. And so the Martian looks at the thing and says, what is that? That's really weird. That's some strange kind of animal, and approaches it. As he approaches it, the rover backs up. And then the Martian backs up, and I'm trying to avoid genders here, but sometimes it's a mistake. But anyway, the lander comes closer, and the Martian comes up, and then the Martian goes over here, and the rover goes over here, and to the Martian, it appears that rover has agency, right? Because it behaves as if it has agency. Now, that's true, there is agency. Of course, it's many millions of miles removed. It still has, and it's somebody else that's got the agency. It's the controller at NASA that has the agency, which raises the question of, okay, so perhaps the person at NASA is being controlled by somebody else really farther up the food chain. You know, you could have a regression quite a ways back. But at some point, again, you can't attribute agency certifiably to anything except yourself. And even we ourselves, as is notorious in philosophy, we're not even sure we have agency, or if we're just being made fools of by determinism. You know, we don't know that. So I don't know that there's much more we can say about it. I mean, you guys will probably think of something more to say about it, but that's all I can say about it. But I think you have two questions on the table now. There was that one.
Yeah.
And the other one is religious versus ET, you know, religious figures versus extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
So I'm going to respond to that, and then I'm going to shut up again for a little bit until you come up with a question I can answer. Anyway, obviously, so John Fowles, marvelous author. I don't know if you guys have read any of John Fowles. I absolutely love the Magus, but he wrote a book called A Maggot. Now, he didn't mean the little fly larva. A maggot was a medieval term for going on a walkabout kind of a thing, right? And in the end of this thing, it turns out it involves a UFO. And I'm trying to remember White. What's her name? White. Founded a religion. Is not Seventh-day Adventism. What's that? Ellen White. Yes, Ellen White. Anyway, it turns out that, and it's not Seventh-day Adventist, isn't it Christian Science she founded? Seventh-day Adventist, thank you. It turns out that she, as a young woman, stumbles on this cave, and there's a UFO and an ET in there, and that becomes the foundation of her experience that she develops into this religion, okay? So one of our attendees, Ellen Zeckman here, is fascinated by Mariology, right? And the idea that, which Ingo wrote a book about as well. Ingo Swan's got his fingers and everything. Anyway, wrote a book about the appearances of the Blessed Virgin Mary or some title like that, where he implies that maybe these are all ET events, you know, some kind of extraterrestrial or UFO, or, you know, that thing's in my way. And suggests that those maybe were actually events that people didn't have the conceptual ability to explain, except in the own terms the terms they could understand, which is the context of their day. And you know, you tie John Fowles and Mariology all together, and who knows? It may be that all of our experiences that get turned into religions are of that quality in nature. We're just trying to explain an experienced event that we don't have an actual ontological, to use that word, ontological, advanced enough ontological concept to capture, which of course ties right into what we talk about experiencers interpreting the things that they experience oftentimes and things that they know and understand, even though it might be something else, right? All right, who turned out that light?
I think that was you, actually.
It might have been. Okay.
Mike, do you want to speak to that, or no?
Religion is the domestication of the uncanny. I don't know.
Ooh, that's nice.
That's an idea that I've been playing with. But I don't know. I've thought some about the religious, spiritual dimensions of this phenomenon, but I only see the phenomenon as a symbolic or, you know, sort of an occasion for the emergence of a religiosity in response to it, which is not necessarily indicative of the divine nature of the object.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Why like for example, I was driving up to the Seoul conference 2 years ago, and I saw a mountain, Bakersfield. You know, there's that stretch once you come over the mountains and you go into the what is that called? You know, after Lancaster. Grapevine, thank you. I looked over, and just the vastness of the earth just struck me, and the mountains, and I don't know, I just had this, I felt this something, you know, and I had this, you know, an opening, an awakening, or whatever it was, you know. And I thought to myself, I mean, that is factual. That happened to me. It was a kind of existential moment, the silence of being or whatever. But I don't generate any metaphysics about the mountain from that. It's a mountain. So in a sense, I think we need a Zen moment here for the UFO stuff, you know. Let's just bring it back down to earth in a weird way, and let's hold the weird in place. And so that's why I really liked Jim Madden's talk. I thought was, where are you? Are you Jim? Are you here? I thought, and absolutely profound meditation on this ontological shock moment in which you suspend the closure of interpretation. And that's what I kind of see happening. A lot of us are struggling to interpret and hypothesize, like to put forth another hypothesis. But the closure of the hermeneutic in this interpretive is the problem in many ways. We have to hold ourselves, I think, suspended. And I love you're bringing in Zizek. Exactly, yes. There's this ideological component. And so what I wanted to do is engage with you in the distinction between ontology and metaphysics. Metaphysics is the specificity of an interpretive structure that closes it into an order of being. Ontology is this existential, it's the shock. It's the Tillichian shock. It's the Heideggerian. So Heidegger actually makes a distinction between ontology and metaphysics, I think. And that distinction is not, I think, really appreciated here. Ontology is this existential experience of just this groundless being, this thing that we're thrown into, you know, whatever Heidegger talks about. Metaphysics is something else. That actually starts to bring us into the closure of interpretation, and it brings us in the direction of a kind of science. I mean, I really think metaphysics enables science in many ways, right? And so there's the scientific employment of metaphysical structures that are linked in interesting ways to our sciences, that provide a direction and a clarity with respect to the empirical world, that kind of, in a sense, produces a form of perception, an intellectual apparatus of perception that helps us understand how to use our abstract structures in science. That's metaphysics. And you can go endlessly about, look at what happened with Newton, for example. Gravity, we don't even know what gravity is, for God's sakes. In physics, what you have are equations that express self-consistency. F equals ma. Mm-hmm. What's force? What's mass? It's a self-consistency relationship. What's the Einstein field equation? R mu nu equals 8 pi T mu nu. It's just a self-consistency relationship that shows us that the space-time geometry and the matter fields and all of that stuff, the matter and energy, they form a sort of self-consistent relationship. So that's what you have in science, are relations. And when Newton was asked, what is gravity? He's like, I know, hypothesis non fingo. I don't feign a hypothesis. I don't know what the hell it is. Is it, because there are all sorts of theories about what gravity was, what really is it? Is it vortices? Descartes had this beautiful, picture of the effluvium, like the stuff, actually. It was like like a frictional force, actually. And he gets the wrong forms for different physical quantities out of that view. But Einstein sort of said, I don't know what it is. I can tell you what it does. And the description of the relationships, F equals M,
and
M1,
of course
M2
that's interesting because
it's a relation, right?
The Vienna Circle, of course, rejected any idea that metaphysics could explain anything.
What is it?
The Vienna Circle rejected the idea that physical questions were not worth answering.
Yes, and then they got into this confusion with Heidegger as well. Carnap and Heidegger famously. But they don't really read they don't read him, and he was trying to introduce this more profound distinction between the ontic and the ontological, and metaphysics, I think, is something that is, I think we should avoid metaphysics totally here. Ontology is another thing. This is another question.
Well, it is a form of metaphysics. But before we go there, I actually have a question for the audience.
Yeah.
I've had this feeling, and this has been going on ever since day one, right? But I have this feeling that there's a sizable number of folks out there who aren't clear on what we mean when we say ontological and epistemic. So how many here, and just be honest, no judging going on here, except maybe from Jeff, but no.
not me.
Who here feels like you're not really quite clear on what ontology is, what epistemology is, and what the difference is? Is anybody here? Okay, so there's a bunch of them. Can we maybe give them a layperson's definition of those two terms?
Use street English, not classroom English.
Street English, but how are we going to clean it off? No, okay. Yeah, so you want to give a stab at it, or?
I mean, I'm introducing a distinction that one can only appreciate later. So we should just talk. Ontology
all right.
and metaphysics are usually talked about as the same
Yeah,
thing.
but I'm more interested in them just understanding basically. So we
Yeah,
throw out the
so
term ontology. So
ontology is the theory of being, or
ontology is essentially a study of what exists, what is real. You get right down to it, very simply expressed, right? So what are UFOs is an ontological question. Do UFOs exist is an ontological question, right? Now, epistemology is what we know, how we can know it, what it means to know something. So UFOs can be a specific thing, but we don't know what they are. The fact that we don't know what they are is an epistemic issue, right? And so that's the distinction between those two things. And if you just keep in mind, ontology is what exists isn't real, and epistemology is what do we know about it, and can we know anything about it, you should be pretty good in a discussion like this. Okay.
The two questions I get asked on podcasts the most, so to go back to Brenda's comment, are, do you believe UFOs exist?
Mm-hmm.
They use the word believe. I don't like it, but that's what they use. And if they're a little more sophisticated, they'll say, will we ever know? Can we know?
Mm.
And that's the I think the deeper question, but they don't mean it in the Heideggerian or the philosophical sense. They really want to know. I mean, it's like people really care about what reality is. They really do. And they want to live in the real world. They don't want to live in the world they don't live in, or that doesn't exist. So I think the it's a really good question. Like, what is there such a thing as the UFO, and can we ever know for certain what it is? And that calls into question, again, all of our ways of knowing. And what we're doing here. It calls into serious question, this conversation.
Was that a question?
Yeah, that's a question. That's really, I wouldn't know what to tell the podcasters. I'm like, I don't. Yeah.
That's the question.
Well,
What
exactly.
people want answered.
They do, and they also want to know the religious question too. By the way, they want to relate the UFO to angels, and usually demons. Unfortunately,
Let me kick in just real quick another thought I had on that question, even though I said I wouldn't say anything else about it, right? And that is, this ties into my interest in aliens and consciousness. The evidence is really strong that they seem able to manipulate consciousness.
Yeah.
Right? They can cause you to believe or know or experience something that maybe isn't ontologically real, right?
Yeah.
You're getting practice with that term now. Okay, good. If they can do that, then could it be possible, this is pure speculation, that in fact they want us to interpret this religiously.
yeah.
And that's an interesting concept, which we don't have the answer for either, right?
Yeah.
So,
Can I give you a simple example of that? So, one of the series that we cite in the schedule is called Beyond, and it begins with this really powerful image of this angel, and as the angel turns around, you realize that there's an alien gray manipulating the angel.
yeah.
And so the image embodies this notion that religious experience is deceptive experience, and it's being manipulated. And I've been asked the question too, well, aren't you part of the manipulation? You know, maybe this whole conversation is part of the manipulation.
Fellow travelers.
Yeah, but it's a serious question, and it gets into this issue, I think, in a really powerful way. Particularly if our religions are essentially forms of deception that are deceiving the believer, aren't are we part of that, you know, in a different mode or a different kind of language?
So that raises an interesting thought about our connection with reality. So, Mike, you like to talk about Kant, of course, quite a bit. And Kant is famous for oversimplifying, in my case, but oversimplifying the idea. Yes, what? Okay, never mind. Anyway.
Did you say Kant and oversimplification in the same
Not in terms
It's
of
not
Kant,
possible.
in terms of my
Okay,
explanation
sorry.
of Kant.
All right, that I can
Yes,
accept that.
okay, yeah, because if we really tried to explicate Kant at the level he was doing it,
Unfortunately,
this room would
yes.
empty quite quickly. So,
We do need a break. Maybe that's a good break.
okay, all right, I'll talk fast. No, so Kant, he's famous for the distinction between what we perceive as reality and reality being something that is really inaccessible to us, right? And so this has become quite widely known. I mean, the Matrix basically is a kind of a popular depiction of this. Of course, it also ties into Descartes and his brain in a vat idea and all that. I'm not going to get into there. But the problem is, of course, notoriously, we don't have a direct connection with the Ding an sich, as Kant called it, you know, the world as it really is. Which is deception when you get right down to it, isn't it? We actually live deception. And so should people be blamed for being, you know, the useful idiots in promoting
I'm not
deception?
blaming
Okay,
anyone.
Okay, all
I'm not
right.
blaming anyone.
Yeah, he
No,
just says that. No, okay, yeah. But, I mean, should we, or, I mean, the world it persists in a deception of sorts, right?
I have a different view of that. but-
Well, that's good, because this would be very insipid if you didn't. Okay, so go ahead.
No, I mean, like, it's easy to misread perhaps Kant, and it's been done for centuries. But, I mean, Kant actually was really trying to demonstrate, I think, I mean, this is my view, people can push back on it, but Kant was just simply trying to demonstrate that the very idea of a mind-independent reality is kind of inherently absurd. Because it postulates a transcendental, or a transcendent, I should say, because he uses transcendental in a special way, a transcendent reality beyond which, this God is this realm of truth and so on, this sort of this notion of a mind-independent reality, right? That I'm trying to know through my, through my mind and so on. But Kant is just, all he's sort of saying is that and this is sort of what he called, what is it, the Copernican, his own
Yeah.
Copernican revolution.
Woke from his slumbers,
It's not that the mind, it's not that the mind is knowing a mind, this independent reality, but it's rather that reality is conforming itself to the structure of the mind in order that I can know it. So Kant demonstrates that there is an inherent and unbroken relation between the knowledge and the thing that I'm knowing, right? And then that of course that presents a problem to philosophy, to which there was a number of answers, like the Hegelian tradition being one of them. But I mean, it's a very subtle. I mean, it's a very subtle point.
And I think it could be argued, but I'm not sure it should be right now.
Yeah, I mean, and so this notion of there being a true nature of reality there, that I'm accessing, and distorting and being deceived, and that was his response to
Yeah.
Descartes, right?
But the whole,
Are we going to try to do Q&A?
we better really quickly.
Yeah.
Are we almost out of time?
Yeah, we
Sorry,
only
yeah.
have 5 more minutes.
What is time?
It's
It is a-
very pragmatic here. We have to.
It is a form of intuition, just
Yeah.
like space.
Yeah.
According to
That's a good question, actually. Do we want to do Q&A for 5 minutes, or do you want them to keep talking? I mean, they.
Oh, nobody wants us to keep talking,
No, I mean that. I mean
teasing,
that
teasing.
affectionately.
as for sure.
I don't actually think we should do Q&A because it'll be forced and quick.
yeah. All right.
Yeah, just keep
Talking.
going.
Okay,
keep going.
I can recite the rhyme of the ancient mariner.
No,
okay?
don't do
That's-
that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Let me ask one question, then we can end, because we're gonna, at 3:00, we're gonna end, and there's coffee and caffeine, and then we'll come back and we'll listen to Brenda.
As if they're separate.
You know,
The word epistemology at any time during her talk.
no, she will not. She will not use the word epistemology anytime during her talk. That's what she just said.
I am so disappointed.
yeah.
Yeah.
But in terms of the whole, I mean, if one can sum up the whole history of human religious experience, which is my job, I just self-anointed myself. It's that this reality is not what is there. There is another world. And what religious revelation is an access or a human experience of that other world, impinging and imploding into this one. And I know that's not philosophy, but we're talking religion. We're not talking philosophy.
I know. Philosophers like to push back on religion, though.
I know.
That's our job.
Okay, I
And
know.
vice versa.
But Jeff, I always want to ask, and you and everyone, well, how do you know that?
Well, that's what they say.
And that's
How does one
an
know that?
epistemic question.
You know?
so,
And that's a philosopher talking right there.
I mean,
That's the philosophical question.
so here I'll put it in Kantian terms. God conforms itself to the form by which you can access God, but then you can get rid of that transcendent.
But that's
being.
Kant again.
Why do you need the transcendent? But why do you need the transcendent being? I mean, why do you need this other agency?
Well, that's again religion.
Jeff, you got, sorry.
Yeah.
This is why experiencers need to be included in the conversation.
There's no experiencers need to be.
Oh, right.
So the comment from Karin was, this is why experiencers, and there's
but I
this
don't
vertical, there's this.
Because we know that reality is broader. It's not a concept.
Yeah,
It's an
yeah, that's exactly the point. Yeah, thank you, Karin.
Why don't you come down here? No.
Yeah. We only have a few minutes. Do you want to respond to, both of you want to respond to that?
Oh, okay, so I need a soundbite. What is it I'm responding to?
You're responding to the idea that there is another world. There's something breaking into this
Oh,
one.
well, I think,
Kant is not God. Let me put it that way.
no,
He's not. Immanuel Kant's just a German intellectual.
no, it was of course,
He's my God.
Yeah.
I was going to say that, Michael, but I didn't want to, yeah. Okay, so let me respond. I think that's an actual given, in whatever term we want to use given here. I mean, I have, in the remote viewing world, I have an experience that it's like you transcend the physical domain that we're in, and you end up coming back in somewhere else, or, because the remote viewing is innately a natural empirical experience, right? I think we're a nested universe of some sort. Now, I'm thinking, in a speculation, I admit that, because it's very hard to instrument this kind of a thing. But I think that I agree with you on that, if that's what you believe, Jeff.
I do think that.
Yeah.
But again, that's my own self-appointed judgment of the whole
Yeah,
history of
okay,
human
well,
religious experience.
Maybe it's your turn to be God today. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Well, now it's your job to be the rebuttal. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, let's give you the last word, Mike.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just want to make sure. I mean, I pull back. I really do value to butcher a Nietzschean phrase, the pathos of distance, that the objective, scholarly methodology, the scholarly methods of objectivity, I should say. I'm a dyslexic, so I always flip things. Impose upon the student of a subject, and the refusal to, as the panel said, to jump to conclusions and so on, to think about methods and foundations, to sort of reflect on where we've come from and where we're going to. And you always do a little bit of it, right? You speculate, you engage with the empirical world, you hypothesize, you collect more observation and evidence, and you return to the foundations, put down the foundations retrospectively that ought to have perhaps been there before you mucked around in the world and got involved in it. But I really appreciate that distance, and I just want time to reflect, and I sort of impose that distance on myself. But I appreciate all of this work. I mean, this is the messy process.
Yeah.
This is the boring stuff in a way that we're trying to make kind of fun and funny. But it's the labor of the study and the analysis and getting involved in the data and looking at the data and developing the conceptual structures that facilitate, right, even deeper engagement with that. And that's what I'm about. I really do want to inhabit the space of suspension. I think, like, for example, art helps with this a lot.
Yeah.
And I think the greatest UFO movie ever done is Nope, in my opinion.
watch
Is
that.
Nope.
Yeah.
It plays with all of these, trying to capture it in a video and close it down in interpretations, and it turns out to be just like a torn curtain falling down out of the sky,
Yeah.
like this sort of thing. But that's kind of it, right? It's weird. It is weirder than perhaps even our interpretations, hypotheses, and so on allow us. And I think science is a way of engaging that. It has to stabilize it in order to make something from it. But I think that the sciences can surprise us if we are the ones using that instrument rather than that instrument using us. So yeah, I mean, science is a method; it's not a doctrine.
Okay. As we've already
Bunga
heard.
said, yeah.
Okay, let's stop there and let's thank Mike and Paul. Thank you.